I remember on the when we did the podcast with Dennis, Dennis was telling us how veteran will be in each, at least one veteran will be in each office. So you kind of have like that military, connected military understanding amongst each office. Like whether that's, I don't know necessarily knows. I'm just gonna like spit out this random offices. Financial aid, the registrar, let's say advisor. It's like you'll have he'll say like better will be in each one, so that you have some contact point of connection to it. And it seems like that could be like a overall possible strategy for each different college, just because you have that person who's gone through the experience, they understand what the veteran has gone. Even if they don't understand, for example, like you haven't gone into the military, but you kind of like you get the scope of it because of the community that is. That's, I guess like what are some strategies if some colleges aren't able to house a certain office? What are some strategies that you would recommend? Maybe one of our listeners is an advisor from college.
Right.
What would you recommend for them to support the veterans if they can't open up one house?
So just from experience, like we've seen different, like CSI had a different situation that Rutgers has, and we've seen throughout our years different campuses and going to conferences. We've seen religious institutions versus huge state institutions in Texas and California, versus small private institutions. So everyone has a different way of dealing with these types of students. But one thing that can happen if you don't have the resources or you don't necessarily have a central place, I think like what you were mentioning, having a point of contact in every office. So we don't necessarily have a military affiliated staff member in each office, but we have someone that we work with that could be a civilian. Like we have a dean that we work with in School of Arts and Sciences. We have a dean. We have a point of contact that works with our non-traditional students in SEBS, which is the biological sciences. We have a different point of contact that kind of specifically pays attention to our population. And if we have an issue with one of our students and they need assistance in financial aid, we have a point of contact at that office. So we have not necessarily a military veteran, a staff member, but they work with our students. So they're our point of contact where we can assist them. So that kind of having that environment anybody can do that on any campus,
Yes.
having like that veteran advisory type of group on any campus. You don't necessarily have to have an office, but you can have like a point person in the registrar's office that can help with student issues, if it's certifying, or someone in housing that can help accommodate our students when they come in in their 30s and they don't want to live in the dorms with 18-year-olds, getting them into graduate student housing. So we don't necessarily need to have a veteran in every office, but we have like a veterans advisory kind of informal, like we have an informal network here, and some campuses have a formal, like I learned from a conference I attended, they have a formal veterans advisory group that meets, in Texas, because Texas is a huge state, and they, so they meet however they meet, and they have a veterans advisory, committee throughout all their campuses at one of their universities. But then we also have, Anne can talk about the Big 10 or big whatever it's called now.
The big.
They get together, and it's like it's pretty formal. I wouldn't say it's informal, but it's like a network through all the Big 10 universities, throughout the country, where they come together with ideas and they meet and they share best practices. So having just like a group in whatever sense. We have one in New Jersey here. We the JAVPA. Where all the members who work with our professionals that work on campus meet every quarter to discuss whatever's going on in the state policies, and just having like a network of veterans advisory, and Anne can speak a little bit more to that, what the nuts and bolts of that.
Like to her point though, it's not always going to be a veteran, right? When I said only 1.7% served, most veterans are over 65 years old, so they're probably not necessarily, they might not be in the workforce anymore, right? So to say like, okay, this has to be a veteran, and also not veterans sometimes don't want to talk to another veteran, right? But what I do think matters is, like, to military cultural competency. So what we do here is we go to other departments. We do it in front of students, we do it in front of the departments, faculty, we do it outside the institution, and we provide military cultural competency education sessions to make sure that that point of contact that Ursula was talking about, which for most schools, they have to have one in financial aid and student accounting because that's required by law to be approved, right, for the GI Bill. So they probably already have at least that, the minimum. But to make sure the staff who are interacting, right, with a student who's a student who served or is currently serving has some military cultural competency outside of, again, not like the media, like, well, I read 5 articles about, like, let's just go back to even January, right? New Year's Eve, right? And then that day after, we had 2 suicides, right? Like the one that was in a Tesla, right? Vegas and New Orleans. Those were veterans, right? And so if that's what you see, and then the next day someone walks into your office and they're like, I'm a veteran, that might sit with you if you have no other exposure, experience, or understanding of the population. And so for someone who's a civilian, we do it for other groups, is like become culturally competent about the population. So you have a better way that you can engage with them. So you can have that conversation and better serve them. Right. And one thing that we always, something that always bothers me, and it happens everywhere, is we'll get a call about a student, like, I have one of your students. I'm like, no, you have one of our students. Right? They're not just my student because they're a veteran or a service member. They're ours because they're actually enrolled, right, with you. And they'll see you more than me. But that's the opportunity to talk about that cultural competency, right? Is like, don't, because then to Ursula's point, like that student, they're sending them to us possibly when really the situation needed to be resolved at the department and it's outside of us. Right. And that's where it's frustrating. It's like a ping pong. Right. And I think the same thing happens with veterans in the civilian world as well. But, when it comes to like even, I think healthcare, when we talk about if you don't have the exposure, I think military cultural competency, it's very prevalent for social workers. It's prevalent in healthcare. Rutgers does an event at the medical school, joining forces, where they have all of the different, PAs, PTs, medical students, nursing students, social work students join them. And they come together and they do a military cultural competency day, right? That way a healthcare provider who might not have that connection thinks to ask those questions. I always talk about like women are very rarely seen as veterans and thought to be veterans. And so you go to a civilian doctor and not a VA doctor, they're not going to ask me about my military experience. And that's a lot of my pre-existing conditions, right? So I think military cultural competency, having a point of contact to do a warm handshake, right? To be able a warm handoff, right, for a student. But that is applicable anywhere. And I think, that's an easy fix, essentially, for if the funding is in the actual office or the population size isn't there. And then joining groups. Yes, the Big Ten, we meet once a year physically at a different location. This year we'll be in Nebraska. And we meet also virtually. And that started during COVID, where we do get to, we connect. And we constantly talk about what's happening, what we see, might work again. One institution might not work in another, but we like to bounce ideas off of each other. And in the state, there is a group we meet quarterly, and a lot of states have that as well, right? So looking for that, because there's strength in numbers. It's like if you are at a school or an institution where it's only about 20 veterans that go there and they're not going to have a department, well, and then who's going to listen? You only have 20. Partner up with the institutions around you or other organizations so you can create that support, right?
I don't think that it was so much of a change. We've always had a reading problem. There's always been a reading problem, right? COVID did not unveil this great big reading problem. COVID unveiled the access and accessibility, right? That woke us up. But we've always had a problem in this country with reading, going back to anti-literacy laws. So I just want to preface what I'm about to say with the fact that our brains were not wired to read. We had to teach it to read, right? It does this great thing. It rewires itself, right, to form pathways for reading to develop. A lot of people don't understand that. It's very different than language. Language, you can put a child in a room full of people who are speaking and they will speak. You don't have to teach them how to talk, right? That is not going to happen for reading. You cannot sit someone in a room full of people who are reading, whether they're reading out loud or silently. It's not going to happen. You have to teach it to read, right? That starts very early. What we think is reading starts in kindergarten, and then we build these habits in kindergarten. And if we think that, we're 5 years already behind, right? Reading starts really at the moment of conception. How? Well, all of the stuff that mom eats, all of the environmental pressures and stress impacts the developing brain. Reading is all about the brain. The brain is the main character, right? And so if we understand that, then we have a point of reference. And so how do we build stamina, right? Because in order to learn to read and read well, you have to build stamina. I'm like, this is a race, right? Not for the quick athlete, but it's endurance. And it took us years, decades to get here. My book has only been out since August. It's not going to take months for us to get out. And so people have to come to the point where I came to and say, okay, I reflected, now I see, and now I'm going to do better. When you know better, you do better.
Exist. I'm trying to coexist. Exist. Yeah, I'm trying to coexist. Exist. I'm trying to coexist.